Welcome back to Spirit Portal. Thank you for being here with me today. And I'm so excited to introduce you to a very special guest, Ginette Biro. Hi, Ginette.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So happy to have you. And um, I just have to say, I love the work that you offer into the world. And every time I encounter something new that you're doing, I get very excited. And I just want to give our guests or our listeners a little bit of information about you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, how I found you, Jeanette, was through the podcasting platform. So I found your podcast, the Ginette Biro podcast, and I really started listening to it. I loved your voice. It felt super soothing and so authentic. And so I started listening to it. And then you started saying things that I resonated with so deeply and that had experienced myself in my own meditations and kind of channeling experiences. And one in particular stood out. You were channeling Gaia, channeling Mother Earth. And I literally had some of almost all the same messages like the week before. And I emailed you, never expecting a response. And you're like, oh, how wonderful that you're getting the same information. And that just became like how I started following your work. And yes. So I wanted to just share that little story with you and anyone who's listening. And I'm sure that as people listen to our conversation today, they're going to get that same sense of authenticity and um, humbleness that you really convey, even though you're doing these really wild things in this universe. And I'm so excited to talk about all those wild things.
That's awesome.
But before we get into that, I kind of wanted to know where it started for you, this expansion, this openness. I know a little bit of your history, but I don't know very much. And so I want to just give you the floor to kind of share where your journey with spirit began.
Sure. Yeah. For me, retrospectively, I can pinpoint it back to the age of 5, right? At the time, though, I had no idea what was going on. But when I was 5 and moving forward, I knew there were people in my room at night, like spirits. I couldn't define what they were. I couldn't see them at the time, but I could feel them. I knew there were beings in my room. I was terrified to go to sleep at night. Nobody in my family really understood me besides having a wild imagination because we didn't come from a family of mediums or psychics or anything like that. To no fault of their own, but so it started then in my recollection. As it went through the years, I started to kind of sometimes like dream walk or have astral or lucid dreams around 15. By 17, I started hearing spirit, which was very confusing to me at the time because I still didn't understand what was happening. So that created a ton of anxiety. And then it was in my early 20s when I finally decided I was going to do something about it because something was happening. And it was this one significant day. I'd already moved out of my parents' house and I was folding laundry one day. Nobody was home in the house except for my cat. And I was folding laundry, and all of a sudden I heard this voice down the hall, like audibly saying, Jeanette, look down the hall. And I was like, oh my God, I freaked right out. I probably said every profanity possible out of sheer terror. And I didn't want to look down the hall, but when you're like looking out of the side, I was looking, and then I finally turned my head, and there was a man standing at the end of my hallway, but I knew he was in spirit because he was slightly holographic, and he had military fatigues on. He had the pants and then like a standard issue t-shirt with the military. And he was standing there, but my cat was standing in front of him, and she was like alive, looking up at him, and her tail was wagging back and forth. And it was this pivotal moment for me of like, oh my God, I have literally been experiencing this my whole life, and now I'm finally seeing it. And my cat sees it, so this is real. And so it was that moment that I decided I was going to learn everything I could about it so I would no longer be afraid of it, because I grew up being afraid of what I would see, hear, feel in the dark without understanding. And so I decided to dive into it and explore. And then soon enough, I had found some beautiful mentors in mediumship. And then I was doing readings for a while. For a long time, almost a decade, I was doing readings. just by word of mouth. And then I had a near-death experience in 2019, which just propelled my access to spirit and consciousness and dimensions even more. And that's when we started Avalon Spirit and the podcast and the presence of kind of not hiding it, but just being who I am and talking about it. So that's kind of the nutshell.
Yeah, well, that's a big nutshell. And it's interesting talking to so many mediums and people on this path, how many of us have had those experiences in childhood. I just have a question that popped up as you were talking. But did you have really scary nightmares and feel like all the good things and then feel scared of like scary things too back then?
I would be really afraid of, yeah, of scary things, like typical things like ghosts or zombies or like anything
Hmm.
that could quantify what fear is to me. I would have that. But I also had these other experiences that started from when I was in grade two, so around 7, 8 years old. And what would happen is once a year, I would get the flu. And during this flu, I would have these two fever experiences where um, I would lose consciousness and I would go into another realm. And my guides would show me, I didn't understand it at the time. They would take me down to the atomic level of our beings, kind of like the movie Ant-Man. When I saw Ant-Man come out, I was like, oh my gosh, I know this. Like, I experienced that. So they would take me down to the atomic level of our beings and then skyrocket me out to the consciousness level of the cosmos and then bring me back in my body. And they were trying to show me creation. But here I am, this 8-year-old who doesn't know what's happening. And it would happen twice, like 2 episodes during every yearly fever. My parents took me to the hospital. I was in the hospital for like a week. They did all kinds of brain scans to try and find anything possible. Nothing was wrong. But it would happen every year. And the only thing the doctor said was, she will outgrow this by the age of 13.
Wow.
And he couldn't even define what it was. They didn't know what to define it as. But he just knew to say that. And Spirit told me they spoke through him because I would in fact outgrow it by the age of 13. And it did. It happened every year, 2 episodes. I would get the flu once a year. And it would always be this expansion contraction between the atomic level and the cosmic level. And it was terrifying. It was
Mm,
absolutely terrifying for me because I didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't explain to doctors what I was seeing. I didn't have context. I didn't have the language to explain it. I was like, everything gets really big and then it gets really little. That's all I could say, right? And then finally, the last one that happened around the age of 13, I remember we were at my grandmother's house. I got sick and the experience happened, but this time, um, apparently, so again, I would lose consciousness, but apparently I kept making this face like I was about to blow up. And what I was seeing, though, in my experience was just full expansion of consciousness to the point where I felt like I was going to burst. I couldn't contain it in my body. And after that, I knew it was done. And sure enough, I was 13 and it never happened again.
wow.
And it was like spirit was putting in all these codes of consciousness to awaken to later. So, like, that also terrified me then at nighttime when I would go to bed because I'm like, is it
Yeah.
going to happen again? Um, so, yeah, yes.
I like what you just said, that it was like putting all these codes of consciousness for me to understand later. It's almost like maybe those were things that were meant to be memories. So you'd have a reference point to going back, like, wow, this happened. And there's a journey and a path that I'm on for a reason, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned the NDE, and what can you talk to us about what that felt like and what was coming in and how that changed you?
Yeah, it
Okay.
absolutely. So, 2019, I had a routine surgery. I was hemorrhaging really badly in my monthly cycle, and so we finally had to do something to try and stop it. And so it was a routine, simple surgery, and it was 20 minutes long, the actual surgery itself. Was it 20 minutes or was it an hour? I can't remember now all of a sudden. Anyways, very short surgery. I think it was 20 minutes. Anyways, um, and as soon as they put me under, now, even as I was getting wheeled into the operating room, I was getting so excited. And I had had surgery before a couple times, and I'm not excited for surgery, right? Like, it wasn't exciting for me. This one, I was so excited. And when they put me under, I was instantly on the other side and I knew exactly where I was. And what's interesting is because for me, anyways, when I do mediumship readings, it's like I'm seeing out a window, right? And they're showing me something and I'm watching something happen. I'm not like right there unless it's an astral travel, but even that is different. This one, I could feel my feet, my bare feet on the grass when I landed, and I could zoom in on any blade of grass that I wanted to and see the detail just by looking at it. And I remember it was so vividly green and the sky was so vividly blue, like that summer blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew exactly where I was when I landed. Like I just knew it was the afterlife, heaven, the other side. And I walked up this hill to this kind of barbecue picnic scene, and I saw my grandmother who was in spirit, plus lots of other people that had passed from this lifetime and others, like lifetimes beyond. And I knew them all. And it was the most beautiful reunion ever. It was just, it was bliss in excess, or not in excess, sorry. It was bliss, not in excess. It just was so harmonious and pure joy. And I remember I spent what felt like hours there just reuniting with people and being like, what have you been doing? And giving each other hugs. And they were the most beautiful hugs ever. And after we spent what felt like an entire day there, my grandmother then took me to this next place, which was this kind of white room at the edge of the universe where the universe is creating itself essentially. And my whole council was there, my spirit council, and we gathered around this white boardroom table. And on the boardroom table, they rolled out my blueprint of my life path. And up until that point, I'd always described our life path like a tapestry. And we're like weaving this tapestry. And, you know, I'd never explained it like a blueprint, but they rolled out this blueprint and it looked so much like blueprints in our world now, like when we see architecture blueprints. And I even kind of was like, oh my God, it's a blueprint. And we went over my whole life. We did this life review up until the point in where we were standing. And then it was at that point where they asked me if I wanted to stay or go back. And I was like, oh, well, I want to go back. And what's interesting is they had explained that if I wanted to stay, it would be as simple as me having a massive heart attack on the table and I just wouldn't wake up. Like I was primed and ready for it in my body, that they would like flick a switch, it would happen, it'd be done, routine surgery, had a heart attack, she didn't survive it, kind of thing. And even that, I wasn't like, oh my God, no. I was just like, oh, okay. No, I want to go back. And so what they allowed me to do with that last remaining piece of my blueprint, and I don't know how long it is, like I try to quantify the size compared to the beginning half, and I can't. In my memory, my guide shoulder is blocking the beginning half. But in what was remaining, they said I could change out some of these different fuses. And the fuses, they looked like fuses in a fuse box, but they were basically these like destiny points that we create for a life journey, right? So we have our blueprint. Before we come into our life, we sit with our council, like I was doing. We put in different destiny points of things we want to experience. And then we come to this planet and we go through those experiences, mixing free will into it, right?
Right.
So here I was looking at this and I'm like, okay. And they said, you can change out whatever you want based on what you know now, but you'll only have memory of the first one. You'll have memory of the first one, and the other ones you'll remember once they happen. And so I remember the first one that I changed out was chronic health issues, like chronically getting sick all the time. And I was like, is this really how I can do this? I just pull it out and replace it? And they're like, yeah. And I'd completed my journey with that kind of always getting sick all the time. And so I put in one of better health. And I remember thinking like, okay, guys, we'll see. Because I was always the one getting sick, right? And then I changed out the others. And then at the end of that, they said again, do you want to stay or do you want to go back? And I was like, no, I'll go back. And I remember looking at my higher self who looked just like me, but I was both me and her looking at the other, completely conscious of both. It was really interesting. And when I could see how much my higher self absolutely valued a human experience, like my human lifetime was so valuable in all the lessons, I was like, well, of course I would go back. Like, I'm not done yet. Why would I give up everything I've worked on so far? And so in that moment, they're like, okay. And this next piece happened all in the same, like within seconds. I was standing there. Suddenly, I hear the nurse in the recovery room say, "Ginette, are you awake?" And I felt my spirit go like whoop into my body. My eyes were still closed, but I could still see my grandma in spirit there.
Hmm.
And then my higher self spoke through me because I am not clear after surgery. I can't make out words properly. I'm giggly. I'm a mess for a while. My higher self came through so clear. Without even opening my eyes, I said to the nurse, I need you to write something down. I need you to write down these 4 things because they're really important for me. And then I need you to fold that paper up and I need you to put it in my hand. Like, I gave her these clear directives. And so I gave her the words too, which it wouldn't make sense to anybody else, but they were like key words to remember the whole experience. She folded it up, put it in my hand. I gave it to my mom with like one eye open in recovery. And then it wasn't until a couple days later that I had, no pain meds in my system, no nothing. And Spirit was like, you need to read that paper. And so I went back and I read the paper. And when I read those 4 kind of phrases, all of the memories just flooded back in detail, and the understandings and the why and the purpose and even the capacity flooded in. And since then, my connection to spirit has been more. And I've pondered this a lot, like how, why, well, like what does it? And I think when you take consciousness, like when you take wakeful consciousness of the other side and that frequency and the experience in that, and you come back here and you get to keep it, you can't help but raise your frequency with it. You can't unknow it, right? You can't know the value of conscious choice. You can't unknow the value of a soul's journey. And when you see the workings of it, like you can't unknow it. And that allows a freedom of consciousness to just rise. And so from there, I just started to be able to connect with spirit faster, reach higher dimensions, talk to different types of beings. And it just like, it's been a really interesting wild ride since then in what I discover I can do or reach or see kind of thing. So, I mean, that's a long story. I tried to keep it really short, but that's,
No, that's such a beautiful story, and I could just feel it as you were speaking to it. And so, did you have a family at that point yet? Were you married when
mm,
that all happened? So, like,
yeah.
you were already a mother at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you come back and you have this experience and you're already doing the work as a medium, you're already like going into different spiritual realms and states of being. How did that impact your life as a family? Because that's something I think about a lot. When you're able to access these other realms, there's a seduction to want to be there a lot because it feels so good. And you remember where we come from and you remember what our potential is. And I'm just curious how that was for you as a family. Did they keep you grounded? Did they go there with you? Like, tell me about that.
Mhm. So that's a great question. They definitely keep me grounded if I start there. They definitely do. My husband is very grounding to me. Um, he's the opposite of me in many ways, right? Like I'm very airy and up here, and he's very earthy and down here. So he can help ground me, which is wonderful. He also has this capacity to just listen to what I have to say, whether he can wrap his mind around it or not. Like it's not a judgment. I think at first, when this started to really open up and we were together, it was challenging for him to be like, what? Like, you used to just ride dirt bikes and have fun. And now you're talking about spirits and aliens and like, what? So there was definitely an adjustment. Um, but my kids have been really grounded and really open-hearted about it all. And they also are quite in tune also. So it's been really neat to see that in them from a young age where it doesn't have to be a fearful thing, whether they see a spirit, hear a spirit, understand their intuition, all that kind of stuff. So that's been really grounding. But what I will say is there was a big adjustment period. I think for any medium, there's an adjustment period when you're opening your gifts and you're starting to learn the realities of our reality and how it's so
Yeah.
much more fluid and it's not linear. And so there's a huge adjustment. And I know I went through that, but then after having my NDE, that was a really big adjustment coming back because you have the harmony up there and then you have the disharmony on our planet here. And really coming to terms with the choice that we all make to come here,
Hmm.
right? And it's like, why? Why would we? But then when I go back to my experience, it's like, well, we learn so much as humans here, so that's why we come here. Um, that was a big adjustment, I think, for me. And even just kind of balancing the energetics that were running through my body after that NDE too, of like, what does my human body need now to handle this frequency of consciousness than what it did before? And so I
Yeah.
think through my whole journey, I'm still trying to figure that out. The more you dive in and the more you explore, the more grounding you need. And what does that look like?
Hmm. Yeah, I so relate to that. I think of my husband as deeply earth and me up in the realms, and and we need each other, right?
Mhm.
We need that balance. It's actually like the perfect union if you can accept each other for who you are and
Mhm.
not try to change someone or not be afraid of the ways that you're different, which is part of the beautiful chemistry of being a human, right? That's
Mhm.
um yeah, the human journey is so scary and so fraught with peril and filled with so much vulnerability. And then the beauty that comes out of moving through that, it is tear inducing just to even talk about it, you know? Um, but one of the things that I'm thinking about when I am sitting here with you is this role that you are kind of facilitating at this time, especially at this time where we're in right now, where there's so much diversion and confusion and a lot of fear about some of the changes that are taking place on our planet that maybe they haven't even started taking place yet, but we're all feeling like this churning and like what's coming next. And one of the things that I'm the most grateful for is my meditation practice because it helps me keep going back to myself and to the spirit at world and my higher spirit and tapping in from there instead of like this manipulation of our human minds. But I see you in the way that you're kind of navigating the world as someone who is really a conduit of information and holding space for that. And I'm curious what that feels like for you, or if you see yourself that way, or what kind of philosophy you have about like what your role is to play right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you described it really well. Like I do feel like a conduit of information. And it was kind of an agreement I made with my guides when I was on the other side that if I came back, I would step up and share, right? Share what I know, help share what other people know, like just be a platform for knowledge, for insights and understandings, for people to take it if it resonates. Like, never do I want to force an opinion on somebody, but I would like to offer an idea. If it resonates with their soul, perfect. It's meant for them. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But it was this agreement that like if you're going back, you have to make the most of it then. Like take this experience and grow from it and share so that people can awaken because I think we are so meant to be empowered, and that old saying of knowledge is power, it's very true, right? If we are given the right knowledge, we can become extremely powerful, and we can become powerful in a harmonious state, right? Not overpowering, but like balanced.
Yep.
And so it's about bringing people that knowledge. So it's funny though, because sometimes there are, as you know, there's topics that are really easy to talk about and really comfortable to talk about within spirit. And then there's topics that are challenging to talk about. And, how do you bring that up? How do you present this in a way that is non-threatening or non-opinionated or whatever? So I find what makes me laugh with what I do is trying to find that balance. But what I really like is I can lean on my guides so much for that. Like so much of what I say is their words, right? Like, yes, I've had some experiences and they teach me a lot too. But so much of what comes through, especially in channels, like channeled messages and stuff, is their words entirely. And I listen to those words the same as other people do too. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Well, what about this? And what about that? Or how about this? And so I just think it's this really neat position to be able to be this intermediary, this conduit piece to bring forward information, even if it pushes some boundaries sometimes, or even my own boundaries sometimes. It's all about the progression of human consciousness. And that's really what I'm here for. The part of why I was coming back was, I mean, obviously my family, but I was like, listen, if I'm coming back, we might as well like get some work done.
Mhm.
And so like I will be a voice for information. Um, and what's really cool too, though, I want to say, is that with the spirit world, as I'm sure you know, and lots of different mediums know, is how much we also have the ability to say yes or no
Mhm.
in what we bring through too. So it's not like I'm just a pawn or have to say everything they say or like a robot to it. It's a co-creation, and it's a balanced partnership of, if they bring up something that I'm like, listen, uh, say it's politics. I'm like, I don't want to talk about politics personally. Doesn't really interest me. How can we talk about it in a different way to bring the information forward? And we'll
Mhm.
kind of like collaborate on that. So it's it's a position I really value, and I really, really am honored to hold. And so I hold a deep respect for it.
Yeah. And there are a couple of things that I'm thinking about as you're saying that is one, the way that you do bring forward the information. You're really, I know we just talked about you being in the realms and up and very airy, but you present as a well-rounded, grounded wife and mother and someone deeply caring. And yet you're talking about the most far out things that some people could ever imagine that they'll hear in their entire lives. And there's something about the information that comes from a voice that feels so normal and relatable that is really important right now because there are a lot of, pretty far out people, and God bless them. We need them too, talking about pretty much the same things that you're talking about. And so it's like everybody has a voice that is going to relate or resonate with someone else. But then the other thing that I think about a lot lately is the teaching aspect of teaching other people to come inside of themselves to learn how to find their truth. Because that's one of the things that I feel like as a teacher myself is like one of my purposes is like we need to take our power back
Yeah.
and recognize that power is a beautiful thing and it doesn't have to do anything with control. It has
Mhm.
to do with like your own internal flame and your own internal compass. And that's the other thing that I see you doing is really helping empower people to trust themselves and trust themselves in their journeys. And that's a lot of responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But that's where the magic is. Like if you can help guide people to themselves, then you're empowering them for them. You're not just trying to convince them of a theory or an idea that you believe in. It's more like, no, no, find the path to you because that's where your magic is going to come alive. And
Yeah,
I love that. I love watching people come alive within their own consciousness. Like that to me, I know I'm living my purpose when I'm helping facilitate that. And I see those sparks, like it just lights me up completely.
absolutely. And that's what like the world needs now is for all of us to come alive. And so I think about like trauma into transformation and how it leads so many people into being great teachers or great conduits of information and energy. And um, a lot of people like want to manage the gateway. And when I see teachers like you or people sharing their story and their information so freely, it's like, no, this gateway is for all of us. And this is where we go. And this is how we grow. And this is how we expand. And isn't that the purpose? So,
Absolutely.
I'm curious about when the galactic world started opening up for you and what that relationship building was like, because I imagine, well, actually, you tell me, was it a fast thing and all of a sudden it was happening and you had to adjust, or did they take it baby steps with you? Like, what's the story there?
That's a good story. So I was already aware of my mediumship and like starting to kind of dabble in it when the galactics started approaching. So growing up as a kid, I was always fascinated by the idea of aliens. Um, I was too scared to watch any movies about them. But like I just always felt like there was truth in that when I was a kid, right? I would look up in the stars. I'm like, there has to be other life out there because we're not just the only planet. And I remember knowing that as a tiny little kid. So then opens up the mediumship and all of that, trying to maneuver that, seeing spirits and shadows and all this kind of stuff. And I remember when I first came across my first galactic guides, they showed up in a meditation. There was three of them and they were cloaked. And at this point, I had been in mediumship for a couple years. And so, I was thinking like, oh, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm a little bit cocky now because I'm kind of figuring this out. Boy, was I wrong. So they show up and they're like, we're guides of yours. We'd like to communicate. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. Can you take your cloak off so I can see what you look like? And they're like, no, you're not ready for that. And I was like, yes, I am. I totally am. Like, just take your cloak off. No big deal. No judgment. And let's have a chat. And they were adamant, like, no, we're not going to do that. And so they spent the next couple months um, sharing insights with me, getting like we were building a relationship, and I grew to really respect them, and they were beautiful, humble beings. And then I remember one day when they were like, okay, we're going to take our cloaks off. And so they did. And I remember they looked very humanoid, but they were blue and they were very, very, very tall. And I remember like my heart sank when I saw that because I was like, great. Thank you. In my mind at the time, mediumship was talking to spirits, angels, um, and deceased loved ones. That's it,
Mhm.
right? I didn't know you could talk to galactics or aliens, as I would call them at the time. And I was like, great. So thanks so much for showing up because I quit. I was like, I quit because you just brought me to that ledge where mediums are then crazy. No one's going to believe anything I say. I don't even believe what I'm saying. I quit. So I quit for like a couple months thinking I could fully quit. But
You're
um,
integrating.
yeah, right. I was just like, no, I don't think so. And I wrote it all in my journal and I had put it away, the connection with the galactics for about 2 years. And I finally kind of got back to the mediumship part, but I was just like, I'm not going into that. Like I choose no. And then a couple years later, they came back again. But at this point, I was starting to kind of like warm to the idea of different types of consciousness. And like, we can talk to people in our dream state, but if I can talk to someone in my dream state and I'm still alive and they're still alive, where is that happening? Right. So I'm like, okay, there's different realms. And so I started opening to the idea. And then a couple more galactics came forward, but they were always pretty gentle with me in how they approach because their energy is really big and all of that. And it was after my NDE in 2019 when they really kicked it up a notch, big time. And I think my body was able to handle it better. And that's when I started channeling the three guides of the light. I think that was around February, March of 2020. And since then, they've really just kind of opened the door to a lot of different galactics and galactic understandings and beings. And even some of my guides that never really showed themselves before finally started to show themselves. And I realized how many on my council are actually of galactic origin. So it was a journey to embracing that entire world and realizing how much that is actually part of the reality I live.
And what the reality is around us too.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you are experiencing this and you're starting to build these relationships, as someone who's taken the last advanced lightworker course with you, and I just loved it, you have like such a big, strong base of knowledge about all of these different worlds, from the Syrians to the Pleiadians to, I mean, the mantis. I mean, all of these worlds that I don't know, but I can feel. And I'm just wondering what that's like for you as you go through your daily walk. Is it like mediumship where you just kind of make sure that you're kind of buttoned up and you're not constantly picking up, other people's loved ones and spirits? Is that what you do? Or do you stay open because you want to interact. Tell me what that's like for you.
That's a great question. So, yeah, actually, no, that's a great question. So when it comes to like regular mediumship and spirits and loved ones and stuff, I do button up for sure.
Hmm.
After I'm done a session, I have to close it off and I have to ground it out of my body. Otherwise, it just kind of stays with me. And then, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
With the galactics, though, they kind of have free reign in a way because of the consciousness that like the doorway to consciousness that I've opened. I haven't locked that door. I'll put it that way. Whereas the mediumship one, I'll close it when I've got other human stuff to do. The galactic one, I don't usually close it. And so they kind of come and go as they need, sometimes more often than others. But I also am very comfortable in my boundaries with them where if, say I'm at a parent teacher interview and when the galactics come through, I'm like, now's not the time. Right.
Right.
Sorry, I can't meet with you. I got to be human right now. Um, but in terms of like learning all the information, it has been just learning from them, right? Like learning where they're. Here's an example. One time, I have a guy named Ninherg, and he's a Lyran, so he looks like a giant lion person. And a couple times when I've called to connect with him, sort of, right? Like reaching out my consciousness to connect with him, I've popped into where he is. And so a couple times, like one time, um, I happened upon him and he was walking down the kind of town square of where he lives on a different planet. And he was like, walk with me. And so we were just walking and talking, and I was asking him about their culture and all this kind of stuff, and he had lots to share. Another time I happened upon him and he was um, changing like a diaper on his child. And
Hmm.
I happened upon there and he's like, hi, how are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. You didn't need to like let me in right now. You're busy. And he's like, no, it's okay. And they were having what they called their Pride Day, which he's like, it would be the equivalent of your Sunday, like a time to spend with family. They called it a Pride Day. And I was like, oh, beautiful. I'm like, is this your son? And he's like, yes, this is my muling. They called it a muling, right? And I was like, oh, beautiful. And so like it's been different kind of interactions like that where I've learned about them, or then they'll give me resource material to read in different channelings from other people, because there's a ton of content that other people have channeled,
Hmm.
to understand more about them. And so it's just like I just keep picking up info from them the more we communicate.
Yeah. It's I love that story, the mulene. And do you feel like it's that easy and people don't recognize it, that you can just go into this state of awareness and be there? Or do you think that it takes an openness and a training and some sort of intention? Because I feel like a lot of us are starting to have these interactions, and there's a reason for that. And I definitely want to talk about that. But
Mhm.
how easy do you think it is or isn't? How's that for a question? Does that make sense?
No, that's a great question.
Okay.
And it's a tough answer to give like a black or white, because I think so much depends on your frequencies. So like it's based on like your heart frequencies, how they explained it. If
Hmm.
you have the right frequency, then you can connect into those realms, right? So the easiest answer would be that, right? If your frequency is high enough, you can technically connect into those realms. It also though depends on who you're working with, like which guides are yours, what's going on, what they're doing, if they're available or not, and also if accessing them at a given time is going to be beneficial for your knowledge or not. Because there are some times where I try to connect into them for my own understandings, and they're like, no, not happening today. Right?
Yeah.
So, like there is an ease to it. And then sometimes I can be blocked out of it if it's not in my highest good to be there for whatever reason.
Right. Because you don't know what they're doing or what they're undergoing, or, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like just stepping into someone else's life and realm. So,
Mhm.
um, but it does make me think about things like the drones and people being confused about that. And, um, I don't know if you've heard of like, what is it? Project,
Oh,
Bluebeam.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about like creating like this fake scenario of, alien takeover and things like that. Do you feel like that's why so many people are having these intergalactic kind of awakenings so that the power is not a singular power that we should be afraid of, but more like, let's build these relationships to people on Earth. Can we talk about that? Like, what do you feel about that? And what do you know?
Yeah, my guides have talked to me specifically about that. And they've been saying how we are forging relationships with each and every one of you individually where we can. So disclosure happens through you, right?
Hmm.
This big external disclosure is there's too many like um, hands in the bucket in a sense for that one. True disclosure will happen through you individually. And so that is why people are starting to have these experiences or these very vivid dreams or, these knowings or flash memories of, feeling a past life connection to a different planet and species. Like there's so many ways they can bring that through. And the goal is to educate, to give people knowledge because
Hmm.
knowledge makes them powerful, right? And it's about raising our consciousness past the limited kind of blanket energy that we've been living under, right? So they definitely are wanting to make those connections. And I notice it too in a lot of people that there is this conscious rising of awareness and even willingness for conversation.
Exactly, even willingness for conversation. And it's almost like they're looking out for themselves too, in a way of saying, no, we don't need you to believe every big fabrication. Like, let us have like this interaction with you so that you know that you can trust us.
Mhm.
Or when you go into like the galactic realm, just like the human realm is so polarized, there is free will. So there is good that is constantly being accessed and created and tapped into, but there also is evil that is being created and tapped into. And um, I don't know about you, but I can feel the push so strongly right now,
Mhm.
back and forth and back and forth. And like, I'm trying not to judge it because I know that there's teaching in all of it. But do you feel that when you expand out into other, consciousnesses, like with the galactics as well, or when you even expand into other spirit realms?
Mhm. There definitely is a light and dark in a lot of things. Earth has an extreme density of it, so it's very extreme where we are. Like we're living in a
Yeah,
very, very dense, extremely polarized environment. Um, it's not an easy one, definitely at all. And that's even validated by the galactics. They're like, yeah, 3D Earth is a tough place to be, right? Now, some people will say, in the galactic realms, there's nothing negative. And I remember hearing that too in mediumship when I was, first starting out, like there's nothing negative in spirit, but there is light and dark in spirit. And I've come
there
across light
is.
and dark, right?
Yep,
And the same
100%.
same thing goes with the galactics. There are light initiatives and there's dark initiatives. Um, the majority of those helping our planet, at least the ones that I interact with, they're all light, wanting to help our planet. But there are dark ones, ones that are for control and for possession. And I don't mean like possession, like being possessed, but like holding the human race limited. Um, there is a lot of support, though, with those that are in the light to remove those that are of the dark from infiltrating and affecting our planet, right? And there's been a lot of change happening on the galactic level in that respect, right? Some of the energies that used to be really present on our planet are no longer present, which is what's also allowing more galactic guides to come in and connect with people now, too, right? In a positive way. So I think what's really important is we need to use our discernment no matter where we're going, right? Like I've had some ET beings come to me and I'm like, hey, hold up. Like you look like a gray, for example. I'm like, I don't know. I have a bit of a judgment on a gray. Where are you from? What are you about? And they'll tell me a bit about them. And I'm like, nope, I'm not the right person. It's not going to be me. You can
Hmm.
go somewhere else. Like respectfully, no. I've had others that showed up that, um, at first might appear negative and then I get to know who they are or I tune in truly, you tune into their heart frequency and you'll know the answer right away, right?
Hmm.
Like if you basically like beam them with heart energy, if they beam back, then it's in sync and you can essentially trust them. Some will look like they're negative, but they're actually not, and they're very, very helpful. And so it's an entirely different world to navigate, and you really have to like remove the limitations of our human mind in navigating it. But frequency doesn't lie, and discernment is just key. If it feels right, it's usually right. If it feels wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah. And what you just said, if you beam your heart energy into them and they beam it right back, and that's like the most important thing is being in touch with your own heart energy so you know how to operate through everything from that state of being.
Exactly.
Like
Know
that's the
thyself,
key. It's the
right?
key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Plato, know thyself is
Yeah.
literally key. And that's what spirit is wanting us to help people awaken to, is like awaken to you first. Like
Yes.
don't do exactly what I do, but take whatever you like from what I do, but apply it to you, because if you know
Yeah.
you, then you can navigate this.
Exactly. And if you know thyself, if you know your heart and you love your heart and you operate from your heart, you're not striving for power. You're
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
trying to be in control of everything. It's like if you truly love yourself, you can't be an asshole in the world because all you're going to want to do is beam that love out.
Yeah.
I just like it needs to be like scream from the mountaintop because
Mhm.
that's like what we all need is to like find our hearts and just operate from there. And I love that you just said that about like navigating through like these realms that we can only imagine sometimes. And that's the key for it. Like how perfect is that?
Yeah.
Like that's what makes all of us in our consciousness the same,
Yeah.
right? Whether we're from Sirius A or if we're Lyrian or if we're from wherever, if we access that part of ourselves in our, so the free will. So I was just going to go there on this tangent, but I'm going to
Mm.
go back to a question for you. Like we come to Earth for free will. We come to Earth to grow through the use of our ego and the choices we make to expand into love, right? That's what I
Mm.
believe, anyways. And I'm curious if you have another theory, I'd love to hear it. But when we go to realms that are higher and higher and we don't have the ego, do we need free will?
That's a really good question. I think free will is always a part of who we are at our essence, anyways, right? I think our free will may, in one sense, deviate less from the highest good of a collective group when we're in a higher frequency. But the free will also leaves so much room for creativity and new creation of anything.
Yeah.
I think free will is a vital piece no matter what.
Yeah. I love that. Um, so when you are thinking about or even working with your guides, like your three guides of the light, about how people can navigate through their life right now, through like this state of fear. In the United States, for example, there
Mhm.
is a lot of fear right now, a lot of upheaval, and it's palpable. I mean, it's just unbelievably palpable. And if you were to give advice from your people, your team, your council, what do you feel like they want people to know right now?
That's a great question. Let me ask them here. Hold on. Okay. So they're saying there's a narrative right now that is inviting ignorance because it's easier. And they're saying try to avoid the act of ignorance for the sake of ease, but rather be aware of what's happening, but then choose your level of interaction.
Mhm.
Right? So instead of just like blocking out, I don't want to hear about this, that, or whatever, it's like, no, no, you need to know what's happening, but then you need to know that you get to choose how you interact with those things. So when it's like how you get to choose to interact, are you going to sit there and only watch all the darkness that's happening so that you're in the know and get caught up in that? Or are you going to be aware of it, but then choose to spread your light in different ways? Choose to be kinder, choose to be more compassionate to others, choose to share stories that might help somebody else. Like, what are you choosing to do with it? You can't allow ignorance to let you be complacent because you'll slip away.
Mhm.
right? We have to be really conscious right now of what we're doing and why. We don't have to do it perfectly by any means, but we need to have the consciousness in our actions so that we are progressively moving all of humanity forward. Because when one person makes a very conscious decision, it doesn't necessarily matter what the decision is. And I'm really going to generalize this, but it doesn't matter what the decision itself is. What matters is the ripple effect of the frequency when they make it in consciousness. That feeds
Totally.
the collective pool of energy. So we need to move through with consciousness, and ignorance is the opposite of that.
And you can be a warrior and be a warrior in your heart and do action and take action. But if you do it from a place of hatred or anger or fear, it's not going to have the same effect, right? As doing it because you're inspired by something that you see needs to be made better. I just watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy with one of my children, and probably like literally the 35th time because I just so love it so much.
So good.
And
Yeah.
but we were in the second one, which is the Two Towers. Do you know Lord of the Rings very much? Yeah. And it was when the trees started taking down the dam and the water started flowing and putting out the fire. And then I was just thinking about how Frodo and his little Shire people were in the hobbits were doing their thing and the Gondors were doing their thing, and how all of them doing their own little pieces of beauty or
Mhm.
bravery in the world stopped the evil. And it made me feel like, oh, there's still hope for us. Like we just need to light up our hearts and act and operate from that place. And even if it's just um, being kind in the world, that's sometimes just enough, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, it makes me emotional. One thing that I had to ask you, and I'm sure you've navigated beyond this to many levels, but I'm curious what the process was like for you when you start speaking your truth and you start speaking your truth without barriers and and you start recognizing that what your truth is and it's coming from a place of love and source and you're going to share it and you let go of who receives it or who doesn't and you don't have an agenda behind it and you feel good about that because it feels true. What about the people that hate you still?
Mhm.
How did you navigate through that? How did you handle that? How did you um, work through that? I mean, obviously you see it and you understand that's just going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Because of natural polarity. But how was that for you? Because I imagine you're a very sensitive person and you've had some
Mhm.
pretty weird things said to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I I realize that the root of it, okay, so it usually shows itself as anger and judgment. The root of it is usually fear and sadness. And so I usually just really embrace the root of it and in a sense feel bad for them. And it's not pity. I don't pity them like, oh, poor them. I actually feel sad for the struggle they must feel that it triggers them so intensely that they need to be that angry about something. Because I know how I present stuff is usually very take it or leave it. Like, you don't have to agree. You don't have to like it. You don't have to watch this. Like, if it resonates, then do. And that's it. Right. You don't have to believe me. Like, I know how I present it, so if I trigger someone so intensely like that, it's rooted in something deep within them and they're obviously struggling with it. And I'm just an outlet in that moment, like a little pressure valve in that moment. And so that usually helps me just kind of be like, I really hope that you, whoever this person is, like, I hope you find your light again.
Yeah.
And I kind of leave it at that for the most part. And then I also always remember this thing too, like I don't like irritating people. I don't like causing confrontation and they're causing drama. Like I don't like it. But at the same time, we can't also please everyone in the world. And if we're pleasing everyone in the world, then I don't think we're being authentic because we're not having an opinion and we don't all agree on the same thing. And so I also think sometimes I'm like, okay, well, here I am standing in my truth with what I'm bringing through and like, okay, good for me. Like I kind of give myself a little pat on the back for having the guts to speak truthfully rather than appease the collective. So,
That's how you elevate, the collective. That's what your role is then in being a part of the ripple or, the butterfly effect of making something a little bit more beautiful or making someone else a little bit more free by standing in your freedom. And um, I think that that's brave. And there's a lot of people that are really afraid to just be themselves. And every time someone can see you or so many other people being themselves and stepping into it without embarrassment or fear, it gives someone else a little bit more lift of freedom. And so, yeah, I've had a couple of people on who have had some pretty, sad and scary experiences just for speaking their truth. And I just think it's more important than ever that we keep supporting each other for
mhm.
honoring that. So,
Yeah.
um, I just want to give you one more moment if you do want to check in with your guides, if there's anything else that they want to say before we wrap up, because I think any encouragement is always good for everybody.
Sure. Okay, hold on. Okay, okay. So they're showing me this imagery and they're like, maybe this will help some people with imagining this, but they're showing me that each of our bodies, like our physical bodies, is like a temple energy. And we've heard that your body is a temple and stuff, but they're like, no, you don't realize when you bring your body, your mind, and your spirit into a sacred temple, and whether you visualize that like a triangle around you or a sphere around you, or like a temple that you walk in, whatever you want, when you really realize that and value your whole existence as this sacred temple, you're unlimited. And truly, what the soul is craving right now is to not be limited. And they're saying so much fighting on our planet right now is because people are feeling limited and oppressed, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's countries, whether it's whatever. People are feeling oppressed and they desire freedom. They want to be unlimited. So they're like, come back to the true unlimited nature in yourself, in who you are within mind, body, spirit, and imagine that like a temple and sit there to recalibrate your energy. And it's just this beautiful imagery for us to just be empowered through ourselves.
Through our hearts.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's a beautiful place to end and to leave that frequency with people. And thank you so much for coming on. It's such an emotional time in like the planet. I feel it all the time. I cry like left and right. And just talking about like love makes everything better.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been so great. And I mean, I think it's beautiful what you're doing too. I just want to give you a shout out to sharing all your knowledge and your capacity and having witnessed your mediumship abilities and your connection to spirit. It's vast, it's huge. And so I'm so glad you're sharing your voice because so many people can learn a lot from what you know. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thank you. My pleasure. And likewise, what an honor. Thank you, everybody who's listening, and may you be filled with peace.